Hello everyone, this is Narendra from Civil Department. I am going to explain about the concepts and definitions of the disaster preparedness and planning management. In this scenario, the syllabus regarding Unit 1 in the disaster preparedness and planning management is different concepts and definitions of the disaster, hazard, vulnerability, resilience, risk, severity, frequency, and details, capacities, impact, what is meant by prevention, mitigation, disaster phenomena, and what are the disaster events by globally, regionally, and also national events. Coming to the introduction about the introduction about the disaster, understanding disaster and their associate with concept of the essential for effective disaster risk management. So here the below are some key definitions and explanations will be there. In this video I am going to cover with the topics of hazard, disaster, vulnerability, resilience, prevention, mitigation and impact. So these topics to be covered in this video. First of all, coming to the hazard, hazard is a potential source for the happening of the disaster. It is a phenomena and it is a human activity or natural occurring of the disaster. So which will be may cause the loss of life, injury, property damage, social and economical disruption, and also environmental degradation. So hazard can be naturally will be happens like earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and hazard may be happening by human made or man made or technological hazards like nuclear accidents, chemical spills, biological hazards, that is pandemics like COVID-19 or some diseases may be causes between the human being and the locust infestations. So like this, the hazard may be happens or occurs. And disaster, it is a sudden catastrophic event that disruption the normal functioning of the community, society. It may be causing a significant human, new material, economic, and environmental losses. Disasters can be naturally like earthquake or floods, or human made like industrial spills, chemical spills, or industrial accidents, or transportation accidents, or conflicts between the people. There may be leads to man made disasters. So some more disasters may be here. The natural disasters like tornadoes and floods. It will be submerged to the buildings or any kind of structures, and wildfires or forest fires also we can see, and earthquakes destroying or disruption of the buildings, and drought. The drought may be causes expansive soil, and it may not be gives the gives for the crop farming, and tsunami, and also landslides, typhoon, volcanic eruption. So like that, the natural disasters may be happens in the environment, and also some more man-made disasters we can see the train accidents or airways accidents or ship accidents or road accidents. So bridge failure or fire or space accidents also we can see. So this type of mistakes may be done by the man-made. So these are the man-made disasters maybe occurs in the environment. What are the key differences between the hazard and disaster? Hazard is a potential threat or a event that cause harm to the people or property or the environment. A disaster may be a catastrophic event that results in significant damage to the life, or damage to the property, or loss of life, loss of property, and loss of infrastructure. So that is the disaster. So the main difference of these two, the hazard is the potential source for the causing of the disruption, and disaster is the after happening of the hazard, after causing of the hazard, whatever the loss, whatever the disruption, whatever the property losses may be occurred due to hazard. That is the difference between hazard and disaster. A hazard may or may not lead a disaster. Sometimes the hazard may not be caused the disaster, but disaster is the actual occurrence of the damage or disruption, and it has the potential to cause harm, but not always results in a disaster. But the disaster is the cause of the significant harm leading to the loss of life and infrastructure damage and the social economic impacts. So, likewise, the difference between hazard and disaster we can see the hazards may be natural or human made. So, same like that, disaster also maybe leads to or actual consequences of the hazards when they affect the vulnerable communities. So here, what is meant by vulnerability? Vulnerability is nothing but a people situation while happening of the disaster. What the people situation will be behind. What the people current situation after happening of the disaster, that is nothing but a vulnerability. A vulnerability refers to the conditions that increases susceptibility of individuals, communities, assets, systems to the impact of the disaster or hazard. The main factors will be influenced. The vulnerability includes the socio-economic status, poor infrastructures may be happen, lack of education maybe it leads to vulnerability, and geographical location will be not in good condition. So whenever the disaster will be happens, the mankind or the man situation um, uh, will be in a very degradation situation will be happens. So whenever the disaster will be happens, the man will be loses their shelters, loses their economy, loses their current situations. So like that, the vulnerable conditions may be happens in the humankind. So what is the resilience? Here the vulnerability is the situation of the mankind whenever the disaster will be happens, and resilience is the ability of a system, community, society to withstand or adapting of the recovery process from the vulnerable conditions of the disasters. So it includes preparedness, response capacity, and post-disaster recovery strategies may be taken for the recovery of uh, human life. So, what is the recovery operations? So, here the recovery operations are in four steps. One is the context, dis, uh, dis, disturbance, capacity to deal with disturbance, and fourth one is the reactions to be taken for the disturbance. First of all, the people who are forming for the resilience framework, resilience operations. So that the formation of the group of people for the giving of resilience operations, that is the first step. And whatever the disturbances occurred because of disaster or hazard, the analysis of the disturbance is the second step. And third step is what kind of things may be happened, either exposure, sensitivity, adaptable capacity. What is the adaptable capacity we should be done? That is the third step. The fourth step is how can we get bounce back in a better way? How can we get a recovery process? How can we get the people in a regain position? How can we get the people in originality or original situations? How can we recover? So that is the four step will be happening. So the four steps which are going to be involving in the framework of resilience operation. Then the difference between vulnerability and resilience is the first of all, vulnerability is the susceptibility of individual communities systems to harm from hazards. The resilience is the ability to withstand or adapt for the recovery from the disasters. And the vulnerability is the weakness or inability to cope with disasters. The people condition very worst condition while the disaster maybe happens. After the disaster maybe happens, the people condition is very worst condition. That is the world vulnerability. So resilience means a strength or a capacity to cope with disasters and increase the likelihood of the damage or loss in the vulnerability and reduces the negative impact of the disasters. And poverty, poor infrastructure, lack of education, weak governments, and exposure to the hazard is the vulnerability condition. And in the resilience operation, preparedness, adaptable capacities, strong institutions, early warning systems providing an infrastructure resilience. So like that, the differences between the vulnerability and resilience we can see. Then coming to the prevention. What is the meaning of prevention? Prevention includes proactivity measures to avoid a disaster risk before they occur, such as land use planning, environmental conservation, and building codes providing. So before happening of the hazard, the people may be overcome from the hazard, whatever the disaster may be happening. That is the meaning of prevention. The preventing of the hazard from the occurring of the disaster is the prevention measures or preventive measures, which is the proactive measures to avoid the disaster risk before they occur. That is the meaning of preventive or prevention. Whereas mitigation refers to strategies aimed to reducing the severity and impact of disasters, such as early warning systems providing flood control structures and emergency preparedness training providing. So the prevention and mitigation both are different in condition. So prevention in the sense whenever the hazard or preventing the disaster from the hazard, that is the meaning of prevention. Mitigation, whenever the disaster may be happening, so after disaster is completing, we are going to be taking the mitigation measures to overcome or to reduce the severity or impact of the disasters, such as early warning systems providing. So people should be get awareness about the disasters. So whatever is the fast is fast. So in future, what will be done? What will be do for the overcoming of the disaster events and flood control structures we are going to be constructing, and also strengthening the structural and non-structural measures and emergency preparedness training we should be also giving. So training to the people, education to the people, and like that we can take the mitigation measures for the overcoming of the disaster events. Then coming to the difference between prevention and mitigation, these are very important actions to be taken to completely or eliminate the occurrence of the disaster. That is the meaning of prevention. And mitigation measures, the measures to be taken to reduce the severity or impact of the disaster. So here the prevention is nothing but a preventing of the disaster events. Measures to be taken to reduce the severity of or impact of the disaster is the mitigation. And coming to the prevention, to stop the hazard from the turning into disasters, to overcome the disasters from the hazards. Whereas in the mitigation measures, to minimize the damage or losses caused by the disasters. Whereas in the prevention focuses on eliminating risks before they develop and focuses on reducing the effect of the existing or unavoidable risks in the mitigation process. So, if you take the example of the prevention, banning construction in flood prone areas, that is very important, or enforcing strict building codes in earthquake zone areas or earthquake prone areas, and disease eradication programs to be prevent for the stopping of the pandemics. So these are the examples to be taken for the prevention. Whereas in the mitigation measures, mitigation examples, constructing of the flood barriers and levees like dams, barrages, or check dams for the controlling of the floods, strengthening the buildings to withstand all kind of the earthquakes, and implementation of the early warning systems for storms before happening of the disaster. So we should be provide the early warning systems or signals, so the people may be get aware about the disasters in future. And prevention aim to the eliminated the risks before they arises, and mitigation reduces the impact when a disaster is occurs. So likewise, the difference between disasters and difference between prevention and mitigation we can see. What are the impacts? But the basic impacts of the disaster can be categorized into human impact like death, injuries, displacement maybe occurs, And economic impact is loss of infrastructure, job losses, environmental impacts. So land degradation, soil pollution, water pollution, marine pollution. So different kinds of the pollution maybe happens in the environment by the disasters. And social impacts, breakdown of the communities, psychological problems, psychological effects maybe happens in between the people, or human mindset will be changes. The psychological problems maybe comes because of disasters. So likewise, the hazard or disaster may be impacted to the human being as well as economically, as well as socially, as well as environmental degradation will be happens. So these are the main impacts behind the disasters may be happen. So finally, what is the disaster management cycle will be there. So here the disaster management cycle means, so first of all, the people should be awareness about the prevention of the happening or occurrence of the disaster, or mitigation of the disasters. Whatever the disaster will be happens in the past, so based on the past disaster, the people get awareness. People should be have the certain awareness to mitigate the disaster events or disaster strategies to overcome in future also. That is the mitigation process. And the people should be, for the mitigation, the people should be prepared in well, or prepared in advance. That is the meaning of preparedness. And whatever the response to be taken while the hazard maybe happens, what type of responses should be, what type of things to be taken for the response operation. And then finally, what is the recovery operation, so that the disaster management cycle it will be rotates in a circular manner. So whatever the hazard will be happening, so we should be prevent the disasters first of all. And what are the mitigation measures to be taken while past happening of the disaster, and what type of things we should be prepared in advance while the disaster is happening, and what is the response when the disaster will be occurring, and what are the recovery operations to be taken in response while the disaster is completed. So these are the disaster management cycle to be cycled. So this is the meaning of disaster management cycle. It is a rotational cycle, it is the cycling operation, circular operation, it will be done in the environment. So this is what about the different concepts and definitions. We just seen about what is the meaning of hazard, what is the meaning of disaster, what is the difference between hazard and disaster, and then what is the meaning of vulnerability and what is the meaning of resilience. So what are the key differences between vulnerability and resilience, and we have seen about the prevention and mitigation, what are the key differences between prevention and mitigation, and finally we have seen what type of impacts will be done because of disaster or hazard. So whenever the hazard is happens, the disaster may be takes place. Because of disaster, what type of impacts may be happened in the environment, like impact on human being, impact on loss of life, impact on infrastructure, impacts on different kinds of the structural impacts are there, non-structural impacts also there. So what is the disaster management cycle? So finally we conclude this type of the different concepts and disaster. Thank you very much. If you have any doubts, please ask me in the comment box, or else you can ask in the classroom itself. Thank you.